Thanks, Maneo. Thanks for bearing with me. Maneo, please.
No worries. No worries at all. I'm literally like the biggest technophobe in the world. So I think you did swimmingly beautifully. Thank you so much for that incredible poem. It does actually fit quite well. It's going to be very fun to kind of see all the ways and the parallels that it kind of moves through. I've been very interested of late in this idea of black tongue, of which I'm like not exactly sure what it is, but I'm trying to kind of move through. Kopana Maracha, who you've had on before, who's like my angel and my sweetheart and like my soulmate. We've been kind of talking and moving through, trying to, I suppose, situate ourselves in our poetry and in a kind of canon that's quite, and we don't ever want to make the mistake of thinking that we're new or that we're not speaking to a very specific kind of tradition. And even though we have many influences, we're all over the place, but I think that it's deeply rooted in a Southern African queer Black poetic. But before I ramble too much about that, let me make my introduction. My name is Maneo Mohale. I'm a poet, I'm a feminist writer, I'm an editor, I'm a word worker, I'm just like a big nerd. My pronouns are they and them. I'm a non-binary poet. And my first collection, my debut collection, Everything is a Dirty Flower, I always love showing off their face because it's just so bright. But this is my first child. This is my firstborn. Was published with Uhlanga Press in 2019, before the world fell, before COVID, before masks. And I'm very, very, very fortunate to have received some praise and some love and some flowers and some roses for this little tome. I was shortlisted, as you mentioned before, for the Ingrid Jonker Prize, and I was very lucky and super shocked to win the Glenn Lushai prize last year. Time is also strange. So a couple of years ago, was it last year? At a particular point, at some point, I won the prize. It was lovely. And I deeply appreciate that. And even though awards and very complex and lots to think about there. So I today is like a all over the place sort of like vibe, I guess. Like we're gonna go through a lot of poems in this book for anyone who hasn't heard me read before, and that'll probably be the home that we return to. But I want to start off with more with new work, I suppose. And since it's February, a lot of my work has kind of showed up quite ardent and amorous, and I'm excited in that sense. So I'll share a few poems, as well as one that I'm very, very proud of writing and finishing today after just sitting on it for so long. So I'm very excited to read that as well. I must say, and before all of my readings, it's important to issue a content warning or a trigger warning for my work. My debut, all of the poems deal quite explicitly, though obliquely, I suppose, as poetry gives us room to do, but with sexual assault. And at times I'm quite frank and quite bare and plain about such things. So if you need to do whatever you need to do, I guess this is the best thing about being at home and these Zoom sort of readings, is that everybody can just do whatever they need to do. Make yourself a cup of tea, get yourself a glass of wine, have some water, do a stretch, do a nap, switch off your camera. However you feel comfortable, please feel free in this space just to be okay. Okay, I'm gonna pop on my headphones and then we're off to the races, I suppose. I'm very excited. Okay. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la. Okay, cool. Almost done. Okay, cool. Let's do the thing. Can you still hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Beautiful. Okay, great. This is a poem. I'm going to begin with a poem called The Names.
I was lucky enough to be asked to write an ekphrastic poem in response to the South African photographer, now late South African photographer, David Goldblatt. The Goodman asked me to write a poem in response to some of his photographs regarding intersections from his body of work regarding intersections. So this is the first poem, and it's called The Names. Time is nothing but tongue and tundra. Both are known to me, as are the names. I alone recite them as beads on a rosary, thumb over finger, finger over thumb, omniscient as the clicking of my own teeth in the night. Black names, inscribed as they are now, as ochre passing over the Swartberg. I alone know them. I care for them. Despite the camera's open-mouthed gaze, they hum beneath me, black as the land's true face. Nothing of the carceral is bound to survive. Look now, how the mountain arches its back against time, how it turns away, finally uninterested. Blood loops its way over the dry grass and splits itself into the mother and the father. The farm is deserted. Its flow is gated by iron and wire. All things eventually yield themselves reluctantly to the light. This is the camera's unwhispered threat, its deepest comfort and absolution. It is the mirrored machinery's click, anointed and made clean by white light. Such terrible things have been done in my name. They are fed to me, only to descend into the archive of my stomach, destined to rot there, like looped blood, blackly thickening to feed and fatten pale hands. Death tightens itself to the soil, promised to us by men and blood. It is the only ribbon that binds the desk to the dust, the spine that straightens both. The same jackal that ran its ears through the fynbos is strung up by its back paws on barbed wire. Isn't this interesting? Decay, whispered to us close as a lover's teeth, imminent as the secret of my own tongue. They have left the jackal hanging like this as a warning. This is what they do, she said, but only to me. They have nowhere to dump their pain. It is as blue as that asbestos from Owendale that blows itself over our beds at night. It is trying to kill us slowly. It is the horror hiding in everything that they have done. They have eaten the earth. They have swallowed our songs. They have burned our ancestors' eyes. They hate the land that even now claims us back as her own. A record tries to remember, but the black earth spits him out like a seed. He cannot discard himself, so he looks around and manipulates the light. He does not know of the ocean that churns between history and memory, between what happened, what is happening, and what we capture of it. He doesn't care. Through a thin fence, he searches for his own face, fixating on a pig's heat, unaware of his own discovery. Instead, he hums, "Look here, isn't this interesting?" A child's finger resting on his little lip, like a bee. A mother's earned and unowned halo. Black hands over white plastic, tugging braids into existence like poems. My father's golden Parker pen, mined from a false promise. It's easier to live better with Ellerines. Bergendal's obsidian monument broken into two and then two again. How dare you say that there are no angels in this part of the sky? Thanks for that. Always nice to start off with, I don't know, something that kicks you in the teeth a bit. Um, um, okay, perfect. And then I think I'll start with this new poem so that it's out the way. It's kind of like bursting. It's like a puppy at the gate saying, "Oh no, read me, pick me, pick me." So this one is very, very new, and it's called Midheaven. Midheaven, but also in brackets Paternoster. It's a prayer, and also a riff on the Lord's Prayer. The epigraph is from Song of Songs, chapter 3, verse 2, which I'll read first, and then I'll read the poem. Oh gosh. Anyway, here we go. My dove in the clefts of the rock, in the hiding places on the mountainside, show me your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. The poem begins. Let a good story begin with palms, double thundered in meeting, double folded in twin greetings again. Let the buds whisper, here again, here again, here again. Give me lilt and lyre rhyme, call an ear to attention, soft fur and fire buzz, creatures of the sparked air. As the elder griot bows low, agree now, say the ancients in bronze grass, agree now that you are human. Unrelenting, unribboning song was song that brought me to him, and song to song is holy singer's kiss. Red leather tactile, black leather secret in this lifetime, Orpheus finds me, velvet backed, nestled narrow haunts, sunned by red light, having remade myself, neon, unthroated. There he was. Shadowy stood, little Orpheus, all a sniff and lireless. We look good in cosmic time. Graft, we'd be spots of starlight and storming, connected in Cassandra red, conspiracy thread, all constellation-like. On Wiki's authority, your strings were carried to heaven by the muses, placed in dapple black, blacklistless star ash to make humid music. Across a field of violets, exactly 2 forevers ago, he finally tells me to hush. Just pucker your lips, honey heart, and pray. Okay. Heels in the moss then as greeting. My matter who is mid-heaven, handful of thy name, thy shore denied, thy quantum eyed, on earth as exiled from heaven. Teach us to crave our daily bread. Let them gift us their sins as we forgive them that trespass against us, and steer us not out of temptation, but deliver us from evil. For mine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. That was fun to read, always. I'm super happy about kind of delving into older work now as like a hug for myself for new work. It's always very intimidating to kind of read new stuff, and I'm glad that this one has little wings. It's stumbling and crawling still, but it's just still trying to find its wings. Okay, so this will be the first poem from my book. This is the opening poem. It's called Lizards, which means both the sun and daybreak and sunrise and day in Sisset. In your mother's red gulf, you ask her what Benoni means. Son of my sorrow, hearing the sun instead, you turn the word over in your mind like a coin. Ghosts are living in mind dumps as your mother drives you home. Honeycomb mountains are brittle. Tomorrow, you ask her for a crunchy after school. Like all names of the Bible, Benoni sounds ancient. Out your mother's mouth, magic, magic. You are still small enough to hide inside the good book's rice paper pages. You do not know yet what you are. Have not had Leviticus angled at you like an ice pick. For now, the Bible is a hand drum for women draped in white and blue. Ko katlehong in a pockmarked garage, they are women made of clouds and ocean. They make terrifying sea-wide music, skupu, the plastic bottom of everything that has a heart. Shells and bottle tops on ankles. How neatly old and new gods sit together. In school, you meet a man named Cecil John and learn the word pioneer. Turn the word over in your mind like a coin. Your mother is a witness. Your mother is a pioneer, not yet knocking on doors to tell people about the good news. You wonder if Cecil was a witness too. Wonder on whose doors he knocked, for which God, to spread what good news. All right, we're going, we're cooking, we're percolating now. So let's just keep going. Nah? Okay, cool. This is, I've come to really love this poem. I recently was lucky enough to do an interview with Gary Hartley for his publication Scaffold for queer poets and queer people, queer creatives. And I got to talk about this poem, which kind of felt like a rediscovery and a re-greeting and a re-meeting. So this is like a strange little poem that ends in a foreshadowing. Phalaenopsis moth orchid. This orchid is an open mic, night blooming, held out to you now as a beginning, soft-fleshed, throat opened in glossed rhythm, rehearsed young and memorized. Back when you were both girls, she was a poet, slamming something against the air too pretty to be the truth. You listened anyway, confusing cadence for cotton, charmed. You slipped yourself between two brass-noted Nigerian girls in conversations. Graphite curve of your name on the lineup, thrice-syllabled. You plan to sing, but you're nervous. How your voice will be harvested by orientation weak ears. This orchid is unbloomed, bare. Windowed downstairs in the university resident hall, a stolen continent away. Tiny Sisyphus seedlings your mother tucked under your tongue, already withering, so far from home. Waiting for your turn, you hum makeba to keep them warm. Afterwards, ignoring applause, you look for her, the untruthful poet. She finds you the next day, on the way to class, and gives you the first of your many titles, with a promise that blooms darker now. You're the tiny singer, right? Sorry I missed you. Don't worry, I'll catch you later. Thank you. Awesome. How are we doing? Are we good? Thumbs up. Awesome. Amazing. We're just going to keep barreling on. This is great. We have momentum. Let's go. The next one is like a sweet scene, but also everything gets progressively darker. I think it's a deliberate sort of choice that I start with a kind of, I start with the colloquial and I start with the imagined and the meeting. I think I start with flesh, and then we kind of turn the volume up on the darkness and the foreboding as we kind of move on. So only, I suppose I'm only saying it just to prepare anyone. Okay, cool. This is called Chiriam. In the blessed dark of Freddy Wood, she catches you laughing at Chekhov. You're here because you love the theater, and you're easily charmed by a cherry tree. Half rapture, rain dance you unnoticed when she thieves your giggles for her pocket, taking careful note of what makes you laugh. What is it that makes a ritual? You are a studied sequence of words and gestures, performance in sequestered space. Tonight, you are an offering. This ritual is time feasting on itself, an exchange and a ceremony. She loves you after Chekhov, and you give her your hand somewhere between Stoppard and Beckett. You hide her hand in your pocket. She is caterpillar soft. Tonight, she's only as dangerous as dreams, and you have loved white lace all your life, threading your baby brown fingers secretly through Nkhono's tablecloth. Good. Amazing. The next one is a little bit more literal. Most of my poem titles are names of flowers, but I play around with Latin nomenclature. I play around with their indigenous names. Gaston and Lesotho, I play around with sort of their colloquial names. And Diania muscipula is the scientific, or like the Latin name for a Venus flytrap, the little nommy carnivorous plants. And this is inspired by a poet that I admire very much. Her name is Junanthali, and the epigraph is from a poem of hers called Carnivores. And the epigraph is, I am stuffing her with confession. She sucks the fat, licks her fingers. The poem begins. When you finally meet her appetite and its attendant inevitable conditions, feed it the sweet meat of your favorite song. Seated in the backseat of a car, lyric by lyric, watch for its pulp. Try not to make a mess. Stave off its yearning. With memory, dig your brother's impromptu road trip out of its soil. Place on an enamel plate. Serve at Johannesburg summer temperature. Roads still steaming from sudden shower. Garnish memory with jacarandas. The appetite has a taste for the placidly exotic. Now that its jaws have a taste for the city, give it more, especially the gold. Placate the appetite with bite-sized, monochromatic histories, strip struggle heroes of their barbed wire and thunderous complexity so as not to bruise its gums. Make your history digestible. You know exactly what I mean. Hold off its desire for marrow while it picks its teeth. Hand it the maw and sinew of your first love. Watch it bite at her bottom lip. Turn your head at the stain. Claws on her pomegranate apologies, fork poking into the boyish pillow of her cheek. Fight off temptation to clean the red river. Instead, decant your fear. Platter the grey, purple Gatlehong sky. Pebble grains after rain. Your father's camera, your mother's 5 rings, your sister's effervescent laughter. Pay this bounty for your passage over the bridge between this place and that place, between home and whole. Marvel at your own hands once it's had its fill, once it finally decides to come home. How are we doing? Still doing good? Amazing. Yep, can't stop the party bus now. The next one is Lobelia, take a seat. Let the threshold be crossed. Let wood turn to carpet. Let night ask its first question. Let the silence answer. Let the bed be a border. Let the bean pretend to sleep. Let walls damply ossify. Let the blanket bear witness. Let night clear its throat. Let silence thicken. Let the root take its hold. Let it arch against struggle. Let the threshold be crossed. Let the threshold be crossed. Let the threshold be. Turn away now. Take the bean with you. Turn away. Something awful is happening. The next is called Night Jasmine. We are here. We are leaving. This body is ours. Watch us leave this room. This moment is a teacher, a biology lecture hall emptied, with things to say, seats vacant and talkless. Let us dissect it, dissociate, separate stem from stamen, fragmented, safely lifted, Separate fingers from flesh. Separate stigma from style. Watch how her fist blooms now. Whose palm is warmer here? This is history. This is memory. Night jasmine, already wilting, white with nectar, wet. Now that we have made this beautiful, do not look away. One more before a tiny breather break. This is called Nemesia. Well, thank you. The electric spritz of anarchy, unsegmented, its oil suspended like a question mark in the air. You smell it, even before you come up the stairs. The morning after, you find her sitting cross-legged on the patio. A cup of rooibos drained already, its elbow angled away from this bright orange carcass. Somewhere between the fourth and the fifth step, you decide to pretend. Her citrus smile confirms it, with your answer already sitting on your tongue. She walks the question to you on a leash. How did you sleep? This one is the title poem. It's a glosa, which is a very cool, pretty nerdy form of poetry, in which you take a quatrain from any space, from anyone, sometimes lyrics. I've seen some people gloss on like things that you find on like Kellogg's boxes. It's beautiful. You can kind of gloss on anything. And I decided to gloss on a poem by the American Black queer poet, Saeed Jones, from his collection Prelude to Bruise. So these are the 4 lines, and you'll hear them again inside of my poem. The 4 lines are: in place of no, my leaking mouth spills foxgloves. Trumpets of tongued blossoms litter the locked closet. Up to my ankles and petals, the hanged gowns close in. By the multiplied more, they're always more. The poem begins. The memory returns to me as a dream. Ink blot, rising black, weeping porous on the night's page. In place of my room, I lie sleeping in an open forest. Moss, a bed beneath me. Blanket of cedar leaves, fragrant and warm as prayer. Until you arrive. In all your silent menace, you are keeping watch. Your night vigil brief, searching for a moment when my sleep dips deepest, you sneak into the moss and touch me without my consent. In place of no, my leaking mouth spills foxgloves soundlessly into the pillowed green. You do not stop. Instead, you mistake the flood of petals from my mouth as pleasure. You do not stop. Instead, you read my body's rigidness as yes. You read my silence as permission. You read my closed eyes as assent, and my turned head as, of course, I am Black and woman and queer. What else could my body be for but entry? How else am I legible but as safe to violate? Everything is a deathly flower. Trumpets of tongue blossoms litter the locked closet, standing unmoved behind us. Panic paces its itch across my back, and for a moment I forget my power. Until I arrive. In the dream, everything is different. I will my eyes to open. I throw you off of me onto the floor. I summon the vines to snake around your wrists like venom. In the dream, the ground asks you what on earth you are doing. In the dream, everything rises to protect me. The petals from my mouth are survivors. I am up to my ankles in petals. The hanged gowns close in, ensnaring you, and suddenly I am safe. Everything is different in the dream. In the dream, I am safe forever. I leave my moss bed with bare feet. Somewhere a lover calls me by name. Gift mother, they say. We find each other by the water. I leave the foxglove behind me. Every petal that fell from my mouth is a survivor. They are my mother multiplied. More, they're always more. How are we doing? We good? We good? Okay, good. Amazing. Whew, all right. Amazing. Okay, maybe a couple more from this one, and then some more work. Some more work inspired by Jinan. This is a sort of a deeply cinematic poem, I think. Sometimes when I think about it and read it a lot, it's very, it feels quite filmed and visual, deeply rooted in the image. And this is about the moment that I told my then partner about what had happened to me, about my assault. It's called colocasia. Cool thing about colocasia, sorry, it's a random sort of thing, why I called it. It's a river plant that only really grows where there's a lot of water, very fertile. You would find colocasia very big green, very dark green leaves by the water of many rivers. And I called this one colocasia because this poem is soaked in water. And it feels like a plant that would grow in a poem that's soaked in wet. So this is colocasia delta. He is hungry and sweet. He is an open palm, but she is a jar of flies tonight. Waiting for the 99, she tells the story while holding groceries. It is about a striped pole in the middle of the ocean. It is about a yellow line, two tongues hiding in a mine dump. She is a cracked thread spreading on a windshield. The sound of her mouth is anything but crystal. He's trying to understand, but the bus is here. He is an open palm, so they walk. She's a green dress, unraveling. This story is a gulping thing, alive. On the corner of Broadway and Balaclava, he begins to understand. Braces near a bench as it dawns, terrified now of the water. When the story finally arrives, everything black as a river. She is a delta now, unsedimented and wide, a shuddering category, veined blue with a narrative, no longer an open palm, made sharp with shock. He wants a reckoning, a case file yawning open, a courtroom brimmed with judges, a banishing, a punishment. The water recedes, leaving her grocery bags leaking, both of them damp now, forgetting the way home. I've been reading a lot of Greek mythology, and I've also been reading a lot of Dante and a lot of Nietzsche lately, but that's also like a different story. I suppose it's because the Bible is back in my life and I feel like I need a German philosopher just to balance me just a little. But what I love about colocasia and how wet, I suppose, and how damp the poem is, it kind of reminds me of the river Styx, I suppose, in a classical sense, that water has a way of making you forget, but in the context of healing and trauma, forgetting sometimes is positioned as a virtue. And I'm not sure. I like the ambiguity of the poem. I enjoy how it introduced itself to me. Okay, cool. One more. I think two more from this book, and then we can get into some steamy work. This one is called Little Monarch. It's also fun, I suppose. It's a fun poem to read because in the context of writing in a collection of poetry about abuse and about sexual assault, there's this push towards catharsis, this sort of like implicit pressure that you must, by the end of the book, arrive at healing. Somehow it must be triumphant. Somehow that there must be something deeply cathartic about it. And I loved being able to write a poem that set its eyes on a kind of matrix that was beyond my individual experience, but it was also a giant fuck you to my abuser. So this is a giant fuck you to my abuser. Little Monarch. I finally burned the vinyl that you gave me. Posted across oceans like a simmering letter, I watched the plastic twist, black bent like light near the edge of a singularity. I hate the sleeve. How it mirrors the little monarch glazing the cover of your favorite book. The fire is a jeweled feast, more wet splatter than bonfire. I'm thinking about empire, how ineffectual arrows are, how prayer is also gunpowder. They say that the missionary's body was pierced on the beach, now drawn by rope across the sand. I wonder at the sound. Maybe a child's wired wheels on tar. I'm thinking about how untouched island reveals who touches and who can be touched. I'm thinking about how bodies like mine are tribes, but only on paper. I'm thinking about my own untouching, how I ate my eyes in the dark, and how you unclenched my fist like gunpowdered prayer. I was a quiet territory walking. I was a delicious border, inconveniently occupied, terra nullius but cuter, brown and boundaried by reservation. Tonight, I teach my body a solitary music, salted warm as cumin, baptized in silence. My feet are blooded and swollen with safety. Grateful now for your lesson, crowned in trauma. How are we doing? Taking a moment also just to read some of the comments on the side. This is lovely. Thank you so much. Oh, this is nice. Gas me up, yeah. Okay. Okay.
We have time for maybe one or two more.
Perfect. One or two, and then we can open up to open mic. That's totally perfect. Okay, great.
And a bit of a Q&A.
Okay, awesome. I like that too. I'll try not to be too clumsy and shy. Okay, cool. Let's one more from the book, and then a new one. This one's called The Night Room. The epigraph is from one of my closest friends, an incredible poet named Kelsey Savage, and the poem that I ended up quoting is called Dysphoria. Tell me about the femme with the upended gender, the one on the edge of a trigger. The poem begins. The Night Room. This night asks her to leave, and now she does. This night she wears a shirt and becomes another. This night she eats a mango and forgets. This night she joins a chorus and feels uneasy. This night she finds a bridge and writes, "Me too." This night she eats their curry and hides their clothes. This night is doused in beer and then in gin. This night she freezes up and lets them rage. This night she kisses them and sleeps unnightmared. This night she doubts decision, builds a box. This night she watches curiosity kill a cool cat. This night she joins the women, refusing to dance. This night she reaches nakedly, revels at sound. This night she leaves the current that spits her out. This night the room is empty and made of nectar. This night is withered blossom now, is open. That's that for the book, yeah. And then this one is a young Sistina that I'm really proud of. I'm very fond of poems that ask me to bend myself into very strict rules and to respond in very strict structures. And sestinas are like that. Sestinas are bitches of poems. It's very difficult to kind of move through them. It's difficult to kind of bend yourself to them. But something feels quite, it feels like alchemy when you get it right. And it feels like something inside of the structure asks you to transcend meaning. It loosens meaning. Because sometimes I feel like poems are too wedded to meaning sometimes, especially for me, moving outside of narrative poems. And this is more of a game, I suppose, but one in which I am challenged to still make meaning. So this is an open letter for a dom, and it's called Beg. Beg, Sistina for a dom. Once ago, I swallowed a blood blossom and inked myself a love, dipped in revelry. Every there, we puffed like owls, bricked back as this new song of myself unharmonied and honeyed as the past. If I gave it to you, where would you tuck my tongue? From the maybe vista of your pocket, teach it to say yes. Twice, teach it doubly to say please. Yes, ignore my shyness. This dance is double blossom spun. Does shame govern me? Yes, send your tongue to me regardless to be a poem. There, let hunger be tethered as an anchor, pass between the triptych shadows of myself, three-paned and bright. Let me sing myself, tongued into your mouth. Let every song say yes to you. Soaked as I am in the past, I've been known to write a blossom into blood blooming. Yet every there, in the nation of my mind, the ray of your tongue forges me open, pens me anew. Tongued in a new language, blood beats itself, bruised, rushing to you, delicious as wine. Words shed their skins quickly when you talk. When you say yes, cities of doubt crumble into blossoms, love light. I'm trying to talk to you, but the past is a gag, slick with sometimes silence passed down. Hereditary history sucks as a segue is not the corridor of blossoms we were promised in school, consoling ourselves with white pages and lunch boxes sealed in promise. Yes, our mothers will never know us like this. There is no country safe enough for this word. There could never be. Who could ever defend the border of the past? Please, let me be a river of yes, a prayer in black tongue, an ocean of myself, a many-bladed blossom, make me a tongue, show me myself, flesh gated by teeth and promises bright as blood. Yay. Thank you so much for the space. It's wonderful to read new work, and it's wonderful to read old work in conversation with new work, and it's wonderful to be in the presence of people that love words. So thanks for letting me say stuff to you. Oh my gosh. I'm not sure how Q&A is gonna do a thing, but I'm very open to any and all questions. I love questions. I love talking about poetry, and I love talking about my poems because they're little knots of so many different things. So ask me about them. I'm dying to spill.
Cindy, you muted.
Thank you. How wonderful to have the space to immerse ourselves in your writing and to just hear a continuous flow of your words sort of wash over us for this this evening, such a beautiful experience. And so the Q&A, I see hands already, I see eagerness, I see celebration, I see excitement. So I think Jacques, your hand was up first. So I just invite you to unmute yourself and kick off the conversation for us.
Cindy, thanks. You know, I'm always I'm so often the one to ask the first question. So I'm happy if someone else wants, if you see another hand, I'm happy if you want to ask somebody else first.
No, your hand.
It's a bit monotonous if I always go first.
And
I always love your questions, Jacques. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I've got a short, informative question, just about the tradition that you talked about of queer voices in South African poetry, because while I've sort of have an idea in Afrikaans, I've got sort of a gap in my knowledge really when it comes to English voices. So yeah, I just thought maybe you'd like to recommend one or two poets that particularly moved you, you know, empowered you, made you feel that you could speak and write. And my other question has to do with how it feels to write after you published your book, because you were obviously being faithful to a particular experience, and as you say, you felt, you know, particular pressures to find catharsis, perhaps to create it for the reader. How does it feel different to write after it? There's a new sound I think I'm hearing in the new poem.
Oh my gosh, these are great questions. Okay, so for the space in which the people that I feel made me feel possible, I came out, or my book came out immediately after Koleka Putuma's Collective Amnesia, which obviously was incredibly formative. Not necessarily in a technical sense, because we're very different poets in the way that we write. She's very much a performance poet, and I was introduced to her work in that sense, and very glad to also call her a friend. But she kind of made me feel possible to be like, oh, I can actually publish my work. So in that, the obvious is out the way, but when I think about a sort of like Black queer poetic that's forming itself quite beautifully now, I'm thinking about voices like Nakane, who's also a musician. Obviously, we know very much about them as a musician and a novelist, but they're also a poet, and I've been lucky enough to read Nakane's poems, so they're incredible, and Kopano, of course, and it's very lovely to have Jenna Gardini in the room. Because Jenna is incredibly important to me as a poet who made me feel possible. I read her performance scale in exclusive books, waiting for a date, and it completely changed all of my shit in the best way ever. And as much as it's a very new sort of literary tradition, because the older sort of influences are quite large for me and very old, like it's all the way from like Greek and Egyptian mythology to sort of like Keisuladeka, and in a more multidisciplinary sense, in terms of like queer writing. And as for like this lovely question about what it feels like to write new work, I love this. I love the feeling. It's completely terrifying, because I feel like I'm writing again, newly. I feel very young. I feel like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. It's very scary. But it also feels like light is opening. And I think a focus on the erotic, I suppose, feels grounding. And perhaps is unsurprising, moving from a space of sexual assault into a space of trying to think about eros in a way to unhook it from violence. So I'm really excited to kind of splash around in those waters. So yeah, there's so many people I could talk to. There's a long list of influences but those are the ones that are super front of mind. Thank you for the question, Jacques.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Shark. That was a great question. And Melissa, I see your hands up. You want to go for it?
Yeah, sure. Hi. That was such a magical reading. I love listening to your voice every time. And I was really happy to hear you read your Sestina. I think I heard it when you did an Instagram live a few months ago. I'm a big fan of the form myself, and my question, you kind of touched on it a bit before the Sestina, but I wondered, because you've also got the glossa or whatever that is, which I need to try. Do you find form poetry unlocks things that you wouldn't be able to unlock otherwise? I find, like, if I'm feeling a bit blocked, sometimes I'll turn to a form poem just for the rules. So what's your feeling with that? And yeah.
I love that poem and I love that question. Oh God. Absolutely. A lot of my voice, I suppose, feels quite uncontained, and it feels, I tend on very lavish language. It's like very lush, and I'm quite queer in the way that I'm hungry for sensation and rhythm and image, and to maximize that as much as possible. And I feel like when I have so many thoughts and when the field is open for me to go run, it's nice for me to have rules. They feel like boundaried in a sense. And as a craft sort of like cheat thing, I've got this open document that I've been updating for the last couple of months as like a new commitment to try and usher me into new work, called Human Words, or Humid Words, that I just collect. So any word that kind of feels like, I like that, I put it on this like giant thing, and it helps with the Sestina, because the Sestina, at least how I started with Big, I started out with 6 words. So I went into the document to pull 6 words that I felt could work and play well with one another. And from there, like blood and blossom and yes, and tongue, it felt like lovely to kind of play around with how repetitive you can spin a spiral and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and still chase this kind of kernel of meaning that still manages to shirk kind of literal interpretation. It still retains a bit of the mysterious. It still retains something of the divine. And I feel like the stricter the rules, the closer I feel to a kind of transcending myself. Like it feels it feels a bit kinky in that way. Like it's like if you bind me really tight, like I feel like at peace, Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect, thank you.
Lovely, sure. Nandwe, I see your hand up. You've got a question?
Yes. Hi, Maneo, sorry. Yes, so I have so I'm about to teach some of your poetry for second year.
Yeah. I'm screaming! What? That's crazy! Okay, cool. Yeah, which institution? Oh my gosh, where? Oh my gosh, where?
UW. But I'm not teaching your whole book, I'm just teaching, So my section for the year is like South African poetry. So I've chosen to do like prosy poems. So like free versey poems. So I'd like to get some of your comments on 2 poems, because I'm teaching 2 of your poems. I'm teaching Venus Flytrap and Treasure Flower, because I love those. And I'm very interested in the form. And I'm like, I want to know your thoughts on the form. Because for some reason, the first one, Venus Flytrap, it reminded me of, I don't know if you've ever been to, Whistle in English.
Fine, Wesleyan Methodist Church.
Yeah, Methodist. You know, the hymn books. When you get to the end, are those hymn books where the separation, they use the, okay, all right, okay. So I just wanted to be, okay, I'm going to stop.
I love it. Oh, okay, amazing. Yes. Okay. So the ones that you are teaching, which is crazy for me to say with my mouth, but the ones that you are teaching are Venus flytrap and treasure flower, which is so interesting to think about. So the first thing that I really like to think about and technically about Venus flytrap, which is really fun for me, is the double dash, like this sort of the stagnated rhythm, the sort of staccato-ness. And it's interesting because I've read interpretations of it where someone felt like it was a stagger, like it felt like it was a double breath, like it felt like it was someone crying, like that that you do before you cry, which is amazing. And also like, yes. And also like, it's so beautiful that you connected with the Wesleyan sort of like Methodist tradition. Like I come from like a weird hybrid of like a Catholic, Anglican, Jehovah's Witness, sort of like spiritual tradition, Christian tradition. And then I was really gay and escaped from that, but still retained a deep appreciation for that kind of like, for its intricacy, I suppose, and formal possibilities, I suppose, in text. So what you're seeing and what you're picking up on, I see it, and I say yes. I say Another thing about Venus flytrap that I absolutely love, and I love that you kind of are teaching it as a prose poem, because I struggled a lot with the line break. I struggled a lot about where to situate it, and that's where, with this sort of like telegraph-like rhythm and this stop-start sort of like instructional direct address, felt lovely to kind of let it bleed in justified margins and let the double dash do its thing to kind of break it up and make it poetic. I wanted the grammar to do the work, the punctuation to do the work for me. And in that way, that feels like a technical little thing where sometimes punctuation, especially like I'm a slut for an M dash, obviously, like all poets are, I suppose, but like this, I think my thing that you're going to see in a lot of my poetry, especially going forward, because even in this Sistina and even in Midheaven that I started at the reading with, it keeps cropping up even when I don't, and it keeps shifting and morphing its meaning. I feel like it's like winking at me all the time. So I'm just paying attention to all the things that it wants to be. And Gazania, treasure flower is also a fuck you. Like it's like a deep, like extremely petty space. My abuser used to do this thing where they would leave me treasure maps for me to go pick up things around campus. And after the assault, they still did this as a kind of insidious way of controlling my movements and moving me and making sure that in order for me to pick up something that I lent them, like my favorite book, I'd have to kind of decipher riddles and move from one space. So they would control me in that way. It felt very puppet like fucked up. But treasure flower was for me a way of, it's a map. I draw, it's a map that I drew for myself out of that, completely out of that. Hope that makes sense. And I know that's not very technical, but yes.
Alrighty, thank you so much. I just came here to fangirl. I fangirl a lot, so I'm just here tonight to fangirl and leave. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I love it so much.
Thank
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for your collection. You have no idea. So yes.
I haven't even touched it. Okay.
Need.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, Nanda. Bye. Korat, I see your hand up. And I hope I said your name correctly. Korata.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? F1 is on my side.
Hi. Okay, yes. Can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Wow, so many questions in my head. The main question I have is, how did you learn about all of these words like glossa and Sistina? Because I remember when I went to one of your book launches back in the day when we didn't have Corona, like that was the first time I was introduced to it. And then one day I was on vacation, like writing a poem, and I was trying to write a glossa, but I couldn't remember what it was. And I was like, guys, does anyone have a copy of Maneo's book? I know it's in there. And I didn't, it was really fun, like when I did discover it, but I was like, how do you know about these things? How do I find out about these things? Because I find the way that you play with form really, it opens up a lot of doors for that kind of thing.
That's such a wonderful question. Thank you, Khurat. I think, so the glossa, the first time I encountered a glossa was from an incredible Canadian poet, a queer sex worker, like mama femme, poet called Amber Dawn. And she published a book called Where the Words End and My Body Begins. I'm going to type it in the chat so that everyone has it, because, oh, you need it, okay? It's a book just of glossas. And what I love about her is that it felt like she was opening up to me a radical tradition, which is so old, which is like this 14th century form from Italy, or whatever. But like, refashioning it, reappropriating it into this queer realm. And she only glossed on queer poets and her friends. Like, that's it. And I love that. I love the idea of taking 4 lines from like text from your best friend, or 4 lines from Lucille Clifton, or like 4 lines from June Jordan, or 4 lines from Makhosazana Kaba, or like 4 lines from anything, like from a Boom Shaka song, like, and you can gloss, you can just dance, like it's an exercise in asking you to think through the words and the rhythms of another person. And I loved what that forces me to think about and how to write. And then sestinas and tritinas and all the stuff, mostly because I am and I was very hungry for structure. I needed a seatbelt to kind of make me feel safe in pursuing and experimenting and playing. I think the best thing about structure, what I feel that structure offers me is an opportunity to play, but still feel like I'm like being a good boy about it, you know, like I still get a gold star by the end of it if I play by all the rules. So yeah, that kind of thing. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Sure. Is there anybody else that has a question that they'd love to ask of the poet? Nobody? All right. Well, I've been scribbling down questions and wondering a whole bunch of things. I mean, well, firstly, you began with a poem that had a relationship to the work of David Goldblatt, and I was just so curious to know whether you write ekphrastically, if you have a relationship to the visual in your writing and what that looks like, and and how did you find this whole journey of having to work with the work of David Goldblatt in poetic form? I'm quite curious.
It was a huge surprise when the Goodman asked me to do the thing, because I was like, what? With why? But I also was, I have a long relationship with working with visual images and working ekphrastically, and I also have been deeply fascinated by photography, and I feel like photography informs a lot of my poetic practice. So it was very difficult to engage with the work of a photographer that I also wanted to critique quite plainly. I think I wanted to be not entirely like oppositional from the get-go, but I think I wanted to play a little bit of a trickster role, that I think that poetry offers us a way to be the jester a little, to be a little of the court jester, to be Anansi, to play Anansi a little, to be the spider. And I wanted to create and to spin and to work off of his images, but to insert a very Black voice. And in that way, it was difficult to depersonalize the voice. So I tried to kind of adopt a historic voice, like a voice that was maybe like Vox Astoria, like not necessarily touching the shit, but wanting to touch the shit, I suppose, so that I can look at decay over time. And a lot of his images are so barren. And a lot of the images are taken in these sort of intersections, I suppose, that were in the collection that I saw. A lot of the images were described by my taken in spaces where no angels live. And I thought that was quite arrogant to proclaim, especially of a white man, to proclaim over Black land that there are no angels in this part of the sky. So that was the direction and the space from which I moved. I really would like to move from here on out, I suppose, with the work that is teasing me more ekphrastically. And I think I'd like to move like visually, but also sonically. Jazz informs a lot of my practice, and I enjoy call and response, and there's that kind of element inside of my poetry sometimes. So I feel like it would be an interesting exercise to work ekphrastically, but from a sonic space. I'm nerdy for that. It gets me very excited.
Sure. Since nobody else is jumping in, I've got another question that I'd love to ask. So I'm so glad that I randomly felt that the Herbert Herman.
The tongue. Did you hear like how many tongues were in a Sistina? I was like, ooh, yes.
Yes. So I mean, when we think about the tongue, we think about tongues being central. We think, and your work is incredibly central and embodied and bodily. But we also think about the violence of the tongue and how much violence has been caused through language. We think about languages. We think about the mother tongue. We think about languages that we've been robbed of, that have been removed and destroyed and obliterated. So there's so many things, when we think about the tongue and what it symbolizes. But I'd like you to talk about the tongue you use to write in, right? So I'd like to know about how you bring in different tongues and different languages and histories and lineages into your writing. I'm just quite curious because I see a lot of that, and I'm just interested in your journey as a writer.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I love this because I think that the tongue has, and the word has taken on incredible significance the deeper I write and the more that I build into, and it keeps cropping up like in images, and I love seeing it because it's asking me great questions. And I think the first tongue from which I move out of is like a sacred tongue, or one that is kind of draped in sacrament and prayer. And I love the kind of internal rhythms and repetitions of Catholic prayers. I enjoy confession, also because I think it's quite kinky and deeply sensual. Like I feel like it's quite queer. Like I feel like the Catholic traditions, like if you strip them of, maybe not even if you strip them, but if you look at them with a queer eye, it's like they're pretty queer. It's really camp. And I love I think with Paternoster, with this new one that I finished, like I was trying to kind of play around with how to unravel sacred tongue. So I think the church, and that is a sort of space that I move out of. And I've started seeing Shakespeare a lot. And perhaps unsurprisingly crop up, especially in pentameter, and in terms of like stresses inside of a phrase. I've recently rediscovered the work of Robert Browning, who I feel like is a cutie, like a sweet little boy, and like when I view him with a kind of affection that is deeply contextualized, of course, there's delight that I find, and a lot of a lot of weird little parallels. Like he would end off he frequently ends off a lot of his poems on these like octosyllabic sort of lines. And I like the number 8. It crops up a lot in my writing, and I love seeing that kind of like rhythm sometimes. There's a poem in my book called Portrait of the Being Contemplating Suicide, and the last line is greener than the foot of the sky. And I felt like a lot of that sort of like 8-syllable something. There's just something about ending a poem on an 8-syllable line that feels like you're tying it up in a bow. And I think that thinking about what the tongue feels like when I'm reading my poetry is deeply important. From slam beginnings, I started from performance beginnings. So it's important to me about what it feels like in my mouth. And that's probably something that you're hearing a little bit more as the poems mature and as I mature, moving on.
Lovely. Joretta, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, I have another question. So Maneo, I've read some of your work from the Bitch media era. And also context, I study sexual violence. So like I'm working with your work in different forms. And I wanted to know, like, how do you decide or pick which idea gets which form? Like what's the process? Because there's also it's my favorite thing to ask poets who are like general wordsmiths, because it's like, well, you know, you could write a short story, you could write a novel, you could write a poem, you could write a nonfiction piece. How do you know which it's going to be? What's the process?
Such a great question. Wow. So the first time I spoke up about my assault was in Bitch. It was for that It Happened to Us essay that I wrote. And it was the first time that I thought that I could put words to what had happened to me. And it was beautiful in the sense that I had a space to kind of talk about queer sexual assault. It was beautiful in the sense that I was given a lot of space, and I was given a lot, which is also in a nonfiction sort of space and in an essay sort of way, you are quite restricted by space. And my first foray into writing, I suppose, is like through the journalist world and working under Midusutando Bongela at the Mail and Guardian. I frequently felt, sometimes in a very physical sense, what space can mean. So a writer would send me like a 3,000 word piece, but then an ad would come in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and we'd have to cut it down from 3,000 to 800 words, like something that brutal. And I was very aware of that possibility, I suppose. And I was very concerned with being cut with Bitch. And there's always that danger, I suppose, in nonfiction and working in essays. But then after that essay was published, I think the response and the way people were talking, and I was exposed to a certain kind of, which is pretty expected, but I was called brave a lot. I was called, you know, you're so brave, you're so amazing, you're so strong, you're so wow. And it's like inspirational and you're so brilliant in that kind of space. And the empathy opened up because I was published in a feminist magazine, but a lot of it was focusing on like this triumphant overcoming narrative, which sometimes also dovetails into like an ableist like lens. It's like so much to talk about, but I felt yes, I felt the politics on me. I felt it. And then I was like, I yearned for a space where I could sit inside and also sit inside the unresolved. And I think poetry felt like a space where I could play and introduce beauty, to have people think about violence in a way that wasn't so neatly abstracted, to say, you know, sexual violence is a thing that happens to friends and this is what happens, and this is because you're used to reading it in a sort of like cadence, even with the first person narrative and essay, even the feminist essay. And I wanted to disarm the reader with what they think they should say to me after the book is over, after they're done reading me. I think I wanted you to think about to think about what words can mean. And I wanted to rub beauty and violence and harm and trauma and healing and sex and sensuality and image and nature together in ways that would, in a very sort of like particle collider sort of way, just all of these particles to kind of smash something together to see what they're made of. And poetry gave me the space to do that quite mystically. And also I also felt quite protected and safer in poetry because I could abstract meaning to its nth degree and have it still be something that's about me because I wrote it. So, but I still wanted to make a systemic point without using political language, but also understanding that by me speaking, I am using political language, and all language is political. But I also wanted you to gasp at the beauty of a phrase, not because you know what it means, but because, or you know where to put it, but because those words sound really nice when you put them together like that. I wanted that too. And poetry gave me the opportunity, especially reading the work of people like Juliana Kotbitek, who's an incredible Ugandan poet who wrote a collection called 100 Days about the Rwandan genocide, and still remains to this day one of the most beautiful books that I've read, and sensuous books that I've read, but about genocide. And I was surprised that I wasn't surprised that I found beauty in so many different human places, all of the different ways that one can be human, even when we're monstrous. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Cool.
Wow, sure. Thank you. So on that note, that beautifully articulated note, I am just going to say thank you for being with us, for sharing your work, for your voice, for your mind, for your beauty, for your creativity. Thank you for just being here and for reading. It's such an honor. I'm so excited that I have had the opportunity to hear you, to hear the words in your voice. And yeah, I'm just, on behalf of everyone here, I think it's safe to say that we're also grateful for this reading that you've given us. And I want to also just say thank you to the Red Wheelbarrow team and to everybody that's here, and for all of the lovely questions that were also brought forward. And the chat room is alive. I think you'll see quite a few people commenting there. Yeah. Melissa is going to step in for the open mic session. I have to step away, but Melissa, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, you're welcome to stop the recording now.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.